Hello, 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 and welcome back to the SEO Mastery Summit. As always, first and foremost, a huge shout out to our sponsors. So, our biggest sponsors, ODYS, Buzz Logic, and Investors Club, followed by IMG Courses. Now, as always, during the summit, we're live here with a Q&A session. And at the moment, I'm joined by Janos Bresnov, but we might also have other people joining in during the live. So hopefully we have one or two more speakers coming in. So today have been a lot about outsourcing and hiring and so on and so forth. So the first question that I've had is around outsourcing. And it says, I've tried outsourcing, always end up feeling great initially, and then after a while feel like I'm taken for a ride where people stop performing. What's the best way to mitigate this, or to combat this? Any ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the key aspects I always come back to is that you need to delegate responsibility rather than tasks. Because that's one way to make sure that the people you employ, either directly or through a contractor, are committed and engaged with the company and with you. And if you just give them a task to do every day, then you risk that they get bored with it or they're looking for something else to do. Whereas if you give them responsibility for delivering something, you'll get more of a buy-in from them. So I think that would be the key. I mean, you're always going to get some people who are chancers and who's going to take advantage here and there, but I think for the majority it's about recruiting the right people and then delegating the responsibility.
Yeah, and I would add as well, I mean, I think that's a great summary. I would add as well, like having clear targets. Obviously for some roles that's harder than others, but the more clear targets you have, the easier it is also to measure performance, right? Because so the challenge is if you have people in a situation where you're like, okay, yeah, now next you work on this thing. If it's not really clear what the expectation is, how much they have to do, and what the outcome is, then obviously it's easy for them to be excited when they just start the job. But as they maybe lose some excitement over time, the speed might also slow down slightly, right? So fundamentally, it's very much around really making sure that you have some goals, right? And again, if you do like a regular one-to-ones with the staff and make sure they're very well motivated, and make sure you keep pushing them and building them up, right?
Yeah, I think the regular one-to-one is key as well, because that's where you get the opportunity to find out how they're feeling in the role. Like, maybe you need to switch out some tasks to keep it spicy for them, but you're not going to know if you just sit back and don't talk to them. So make sure you speak to them regularly and weekly or at least bi-weekly, so that you know what's how they're feeling about things. And then you're not gonna lose them without knowing why you lose them, if you like.
Yeah. Excellent. So outsourcing for the first time, I'm very much in doubt if I should find someone local or if I should try out either Philippines or Eastern Europe. What's the best way to figure out what makes the most sense for you?
I think the key is it depends a lot what you're trying to outsource. If you need something with, if you want a writer that can write sales copy, then depending where you're based. If you're based in the US, of course, but you want someone with native English. You don't want someone from the Philippines or probably most of Eastern Europe to write sales copy for you in English. So a lot of it is about what you're trying to outsource to. If it's repeatable tasks, if it's stuff that you're happy to not watch every day, etc., and something that you can write really clear SOPs for, and then you're happy leaving with someone out. Philippines is the cheapest price point. If you're looking for someone with a bit more, developed skills, education, people who are maybe good at programming, etc., I would look for Eastern Europe. If you're looking for salespeople, if you're looking for people to write really good sales copy, then I would look for onshore. So for me, it very much depends on what you need. price points are, it's cheapest in the Philippines. It'll be more expensive in Eastern Europe, and obviously onshore is going to be the most expensive because they'll want to be paid what you're getting paid. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the key things that I always ask people is like, what's your brand? All right, because here's the thing: if you sell Ferraris, all right, you want to be doing customer service in the country, and ideally as close to the customer as you can. All right, if you're selling Ferraris, you shouldn't be trying to penny pinch when it comes to customer service per se. Right,
Yeah,
if
for
you're
sure.
selling, here's a great example of $1 plastic bottles. Again, generally your focus is get the customer service done as cheaply as you possibly can. All right, and I think that's a big one. I always recommend people to sit down in their business and really figure out what are the processes that you have to own. What are the processes that are most critical to your success? And where you're going to be the expert. So that's the first thing to look at, and that's really really key, right? When you then see, well, okay, again, if we go down the SEO route, and let's say we run an SEO agency, let's say, content is our thing. If we are amazing at content, then we want to make sure that we invest as much as we can, really making that process as good as we possibly can, right? And really doing all that in-house and doing that by ourselves, right? Now, again, you need to figure out with the quality and your price point and so on where it's done best and what sort of pricing points you can afford to write. Even within the US, as an example, you can also find native writers sometimes at significant lower cost, and you have writers at a much higher cost. So that there's always price points to consider, but really the first thing for you to have in mind is really what's the kind of business you're running, right? What is it actually you're doing, and how does it make sense to tie into it, any of those, right?
Yeah, there's also an element of how much money you have versus like the more money you spend on the hire, the less you'll have to be able to spend on links or other investments in the business, buying stock if you run an e-commerce store. So it's all about ways. You might not get you know you might not get as good quality in the task you want from either Eastern European or Philippines as you would if you got it onshore, but maybe that money is better spent on 4 really good links or on editorials or advertising or free products to influencers. So it's all that balance. But I think the first thing is sit down and look at the business, say what are you really good at yourself. So which task this is you want to outsource, and then once you've done that, then you want to look at the different options. Say like so if this is what I want to outsource, what can I get for my money in the Philippines? What can I get for my money in India? What can I get for my money in Eastern Europe? And what can I get for my money in the UK or the US? South Africa is another good option for English, and there's probably other like Namibia as well. I think it's good English. So there's definitely some options outside the norms as well if you're willing to be a bit exploring.
Yep, definitely. And yeah, also around hiring, right? Again, if you've hired staff before, if you've got any kind of management background or recruitment background, uh, you also have the opportunity to do it more yourself, right? And I mean, honestly, as a business owner, learning to recruit well, learning to hire great people, it's an amazing skill, right? If you learn how to hire great talent, wherever in the world they are, it's something that will make your business life significantly easier, right? Because there's nothing more destructive for a business than having not good staff or not solid staff, right? And really making sure that you're in a business situation where you get solid staff, that is absolute key, right? Now, again, like you can definitely get some support with that, right? I mean, we run an outsourcing company in Aristo that's good at that too. But at the same time, again, it's really a skill that I really suggest people hone in on, right? And wherever you're hiring through third parties or you're hiring yourself, it's really a skill that's so valuable to learn, right? So yeah, you really have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, and I also think it's worth like I think for many people the first couple of hires is not a bad idea to do it through an agency. and it doesn't have to be a risk of sourcing. I just think you run less of a risk doing it through an agency, and like you have a very short commitment period. You have people who are used to recruiting for the kind of roles you're looking for, and you usually get like a free rehire if the first one doesn't work out, etc. Depending on different agencies, different ways of working, but you are you're basically tapping into some expertise. You're obviously paying a small premium for that, but and quite often those agencies will also let you buy out the VA if you want to hire them in house at some point. So I think I would, if I started my own business, I would definitely look at the first one or two. I would have hired from an agency. Obviously, now with the experience I have, I probably know what to look for. But I do think there's definitely it's at least an option you should consider hiring in house. Sorry, hiring through an agency, just for the hiring expertise they have.
Yeah. Yeah. Another suggestion that I would say as well is if you haven't hired, if you have a good network of friends, and if you have people that you trust and have good relationships with, again, getting some support on your first hires can definitely be a big benefit, right? So you're like, actually ask someone, say, hey, I'm going through the process for the first time, even if you need to pay them a bit of money to support you, right? It's often a very, very good idea to invest a little bit in your recruitment process, right? It's again, as I said, it's one of the most critical areas, and if you can make it a higher 5-10% better, that's often one of the best things you can do for your business, right? So really also try and be a little bit creative with your network, with your friends and so on, to see if you can get some support, because fundamentally, like, the earlier on you start doing it yourself, the earlier on you start learning, the better off you will be. And I mean, there's some great resources out there as well, in books, for example, where you can learn a whole bunch of things, right? In regards to recruitment. But yeah, it's not an easy process. It's not an easy thing to do, and unfortunately, particularly in the beginning, people often hire late, as in, oh, I'm already working 200 hours a week, and I need to hire right now, and they often rush the process. The process is often not so well defined, if you will, and therefore it's often a situation where, yeah, it's not the best outcome, right? And that's very often a shame, because particularly your first hires in a business, you really want to be successful ones. You really want those hires to really shine through, so you end up winning, right?
Yeah, I think you talked about the books. There's a really good book called How to Hire A Players
Yeah,
by Eric Herrenkold, so I'll definitely recommend that. I mean, maybe a bit more for when you're hiring like department leads and stuff, but it's definitely a good place to start
yeah.
in understanding your hires.
Also a great book called Who. That's also very popular. But yeah, there is definitely some good material out there, right? And I think fundamentally, again, there's a key rule with things like interviewing. Wherever you're being interviewed or you're interviewing, it's one of those things that, as human beings, we often do it very rarely, and that means it's not something we're good at. We're often nervous, and if you've never hired someone before and don't know what to do, I mean, that makes sense. Even simple, I mean, I've had a couple of friends that have literally just went into Upwork and hired a very experienced recruiter, and actually done the process with that person. So had that person help them, had that person ask questions, and support them through the interview. And again, it's a decent way to pay your way out of it, right? And it doesn't need to be super expensive, right, to find someone to support you with that process.
Yeah, I was thinking as well. If you have a mentor or you're in a business network of some sort, you know, if one of your friends or businesses associates or something are in the process of hiring, ask if you can sit in on an interview and stuff. That's just a way to for free learn how to do it, and they you can even offer to give them some feedback and stuff, and you can learn from each other that way. I think if you're like 3 or 4 small business owners all in that process of hiring your first couple of people, try and do it together, pool resources. Maybe you can even like pay a resource by joining between the 4 of you, pay a quarter the price or something for someone to find the right people for you. So yeah, there's a lot of options for it. I just think the important thing is don't be afraid to do it. If you are at a place where you need it to grow your business, you need to take that risk. And it's always a risk when you hire people, but you can mitigate that risk by doing a lot of things Matt and I discussed now.
Okay, so the next question is for my speech actually, and it says, I've been working on finding my niche. How do you know you found the right niche, and how do you know if it's profitable enough?
When you see that six-figure paycheck from Amazon, you know you found the right niche.
Well, yeah, I think as well. So just for the audience, again, in my speech, I talk very much about niching down, and when you run an agency and so on, too many agencies just try and do everything. So really, if you can niche down and really learn one or potentially two processes that you just become very, very good at, right? So again, like in the event here, I mean, there's people who run link building agencies that's making a ton of money, right? Because they're not trying to do everything, but they've just honed in on link building specifically. There's people who do the same with content. There's people who do the same with simple things like citations and so on, right? So it's really just about figuring out a niche and an area that you like and that you feel comfortable with. And then just honing in on it, right? And just say that's the pick. How do you know if it's profitable up front? Again, if you go out and you can see something cost money, right? Like, yeah, I mean, people are paying a good bit of money for content. They're paying for links. They're paying for even building sites, right? The two things I like to look for is, one, does people have a consistent need for it? And two is it something that's easy to buy, right? Like, is it something where you have a 10, 12 month sales cycle where you need to talk to people for a long time before you bring them on board? Or is it something that people can literally go and buy for you tomorrow, right? If the sales cycle is not very long, and it's a case where people have an easy time to buy it from you, I generally personally like that. I also really like when it's something that people can buy in bulk or buy repeatedly, right? So initially, when I started out as an entrepreneur, and before we started the outsourcing business, we were trying to do web development, right? Very popular at the time. But the one thing I realized about that is web development is 80% sales, right? Because the challenge is that you sell a website and then you go build it. And as soon as you're finished, like, a lot of websites take a week or 2 weeks or maybe a month to build, but then you need to find someone else, right? And you're constantly looking for new clients. And really, that business model is much more about sales than the actual service provided, right? And that's why I realized very quickly that I want services, and I want to provide, personally at least, I want to provide things where people are paying you on a consistent basis, and even things like links that people might only buy every 12 months. The whole point is, if you have a customer and you do amazing work, they are likely to return in the future, right? And that's often the problem with web development agencies, that it's often a very good web developer or a team of developers, but they often don't necessarily have the sales skills, right? And when you don't have that level of sales skills, that type of business model just becomes really, really hard to run and drive, right?
Yeah, I think the other way of niching down is, from an SEO perspective, just selecting a very, very small niche. So instead of selecting handyman, you select maybe like carpenter, and you go even further and say like furniture carpenter. And then you get really good at that for one location, wherever that is. Like you say, you really nail that for Birmingham, and whether you have a rank and rent or you do it for a client in Birmingham, then you nailed it. You know exactly what it takes to rank for furniture carpenter, and then you apply that process all over the world. All of a sudden you are the world lead on furniture carpenters. So it's just about selecting a small enough niche that the competition is maybe not stiff. I don't know if that's a good example. It was just one example, but the wider your niche is, the harder it is. Like, the take car dealers, you're not going to win. But if you select the trappy dealers, then all of a sudden there's not that many of them, and you might get a chance to win. So it's just niche down as much as you can and have to, and then get really good at it. And once you're really good at that, you might be able to expand your niche a little bit because you learned other things. But start out with the smallest niche as possible in a location that's big enough for it to pay off for you.
Yeah.
So that's the balance.
Yeah, and exactly as you say, you can grow out the niches, right? So if you start with furniture carpeting, when you own that and you dominate that, then you can go out and maybe include other types of carpeting, right? So the one thing I would say is whenever you buy a domain name, I always recommend not making that too small, right? I've been in it both from a agency level, but also from an affiliate side level, right? Like sometimes a EMD can be super beneficial. But reality is that a lot of the time, if you're in a very, very small niche, it will overrun you really, and you get to the point where you just exhausted all the options, and you're sitting kicking yourself like, why did I do that? Now, good thing is nowadays, like 301s and the likes does actually work really well. So rebranding into a new domain and still keeping your existing rankings is typically not that difficult, even with a EMD, right? So it's not necessarily the end of the world, but yeah, doing it right, getting the brand right from the beginning and making it broad enough for growth is definitely a big suggestion. So
Yeah, I think that if you're starting out and you're trying to get client work, I think it's just very important that you go such a small niche that you can be the best, even though you just started out. I mean,
yeah,
that's essentially, you want to be the best at what you do. So and there's a lot of people out there doing SEO, and some of them are very good, and some of them are not so good. So find a niche that you're the first one to do, or at least that you can see the other ones doing and not doing very well, and then be that guy. And then from there you can be other guys, but start somewhere and be the guy to go for dog walkers in Budapest or whatever it might be.
yeah. Yeah, and so one thing that is sometimes a little bit challenging. So, particularly when providing services, a lot of time people it's like, ooh, there's already a lot of people in this niche. Maybe I shouldn't do that. So again, like if you look anywhere in the world, there's typically a lot of restaurants, right? Well, COVID might change that, but hey, but typically there's a lot of restaurants, right? Now, reality is you could still open a restaurant in most places and make good money. But the key thing is understanding, how do you differentiate yourself from the competitors? How do you stand out? And what is it you're planning to do different, right? So most of the people that I've worked with that have been very successful going into an existing field with a ton of competitors is really because they've set a clear vision. And so occasionally that can be price, but most of the time it's either process, it's how it's being fulfilled, or something else, right? Where they have like a clear, great vision of, we're gonna do this like this, and therefore we will be the best, right? So, I mean, again, going back to some of the guys on this call, that I've been speaking today. So we had Dan Ray, for example, talking about how he built link building teams and so on, right? And he have a particular process he follows, and again, many people do link building, but he have been very successful doing it his way because he have a very solid theory. He have a very solid framework to do it from. It's not necessarily the best or the right way to do it, but it's a way that's very consistent, and he have his way of delivering results consistent, right? So that's an example of, again, don't be afraid of a niche because it's overcrowded or because there's a lot of people in it, right? You really want to make sure that don't let that scare you, right? Okay, so the next question here from Heather is saying, my main challenge is getting the right foreign assistant to help me with my many tasks. Okay, well, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think Heather, I think your main problem is that you have many tasks that you're trying to get someone to help you with. So I think you want to start by documenting really well one or two tasks, and then you get your VA or your Upwork help or wherever you got this phone system, you get them to get really good at one or two tasks. Once they're good enough at those tasks that you don't have to touch them anymore, then you can add a third task and a fourth task, and then you gauge when when they have enough tasks, and then you maybe need to hire a second one. But I think if you give them a list of 20 tasks to do right away, you're setting them up to fail, because they're not going to be. And then I think the second thing is accept that they're maybe not as good as you are, but your time is more valuable. So if you're getting someone who's 80% as good as you are at a task, but you're only paying them 25% of what you would pay yourself, then you made a good deal. And I think that's it's very much looking at that cost benefit of having someone do the task for you. Obviously, some tasks they need to be 100%, right. What writing, outreach, sales outreach they need to be really good at that for you, or whatever. Depending on your task, you might have something where you need a zero error rate for purchase ordering or whatever it might be. But generally speaking, like if they do it almost as good as you or good enough, but they are much cheaper labor than you are, then you made a good deal. And then you maybe just need to look at if you need more than one or two VAs to do the task for you. But I would say like start small, start by the stuff that you really need to outsource, and then add more tasks until you break it, and then pull it down a level, and then hire a second outsource staff.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally as well, like one of the things that people tend to do is exactly as you say, Jens, that they start out with a whole host of tasks, right? It can be difficult in a small business because you often don't have, 40 hours worth of work. And very often people ask me if they should hire full time, right? And my recommendation is really do it if you can. And I'll tell you why, right? Because very, very often, everywhere in the world, if you hire someone part-time and they're looking for more work, you run the risk of training them up for the competition. And what I mean with that is the fact that very often, someone would say, oh yeah, I'm okay with 20 hours a week, but they're okay with that comparing to no work. But if someone else coming out for them full time, they will often jump at a heartbeat, right? So the big challenge that a lot of people see is they start out with someone part-time, suddenly they come and like, oh, by the way, I need to quit because I got offered a full-time job. And at that point, when someone comes to you like that, it's already kind of too late. Like sometimes people try and salvage it by like, oh, but now I'll hire you full-time or whatever. But very often, if they have already committed to someone else, they're very unlikely to change that, right? So yeah, definitely a big recommendation from my side to, if you can, and businesses can't always, and again, don't put yourself into financial trouble to do it. But if you can and have the opportunity to hire people full time, I really like that. Now, one of the concepts that I really love is having something that people can always do, because exactly like we've just been saying, people can be in situations where you can't necessarily fulfill all their time. But if you have certain tasks that you can always do, so if you run an agency and you do a lot of outreach, for example, making sure that they can always do more outreach for new clients. If you drill that process into them as the first thing, and if you make it clear anytime you have available time, this is the thing you do, or an SEO particular, something like link building is relevant to that as well, right? Because very, very frequently in SEO, well, very few SEOs I know have too many links. So link building is a great example of a process where, if you don't have anything else for the individual, they can always go and do link building because you won't get too many links, right? So, but really starting with a process where people can actually go and really become experts in it and really get good at it, and then making sure they can keep doing it, right? By doing that, that's a good way to save yourself, because what happens with many people is that they hire someone for 40 hours a week and they end up being so busy trying to find work for them to do, right? Trying to train them up and so on. And particularly, it happens a lot of time when they're really busy and they have other things they should be doing instead. So their focus get totally misdirected. They're not doing the things they should. And often they actually end up making up work just to keep the VA busy, but never actually use that work or never use the outcome of that work, right? So really, I highly recommend some of these sort of forever tasks that you have that your VA can do at any point in time if they run out of work, because that will definitely save you a lot of headaches when you get into a situation like that. So I hope that's helpful, huh?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you made a good point about the full time versus part time. I mean, at the agency, we almost exclusively offer full time at Arista sourcing for that same reason, because we just can't guarantee that we can hold on to the part time stuff. So.
And I mean, realistically, there's definitely people that don't need full time work. So in the US, you will have, or in most places in the world, you might have a mom or a dad who want to spend a certain amount of time with their kids, right? And they are only interested in part time work, and that's great. The only challenge is that there's not a lot of those people around. And the secondary challenge is what I see from a lot of people is they start out part time, and then they really want the people being able to go and do full time, and they can't because of the situation they're in, right? So that can definitely be a challenge as well. But again, main thing really is getting started, right? The main thing is really getting moving, start doing more valuable stuff with your time, right? So really get yourself into a position where someone is doing some of the stuff that you shouldn't be doing, and really making sure that you do more time valuable stuff with your time and effort, right? So excellent. And the next question here, just looking for something specific to outsourcing. So this one is, I think this one is very Filipino, but basically saying, I have multiple times tried to hire good Filipino link builders. However, they all seem to only know how to do blog commenting and forum comments, etc. So link building techniques from 5-10 years ago. What is a good way to find good SEOs?
So, there's a lot of really, I mean, I would probably go the other way. I mean, one thing is going through an agency that has good recruiters. Like, if you don't, if you find out that you haven't got the skill yourself to find these people, go through an agency of some sort, either a recruitment agency or hire through a VA agency, so that they're not working directly for you. I think the other way to go is to hire a really good person who's reliable, who you trust, who's a good communicator, and then pay for some training for them. Get there's tons of training out there, courses. If you got the right person and they are good at learning things, they can, in a couple of weeks to a month, they can learn a lot of the good link building techniques. And all of a sudden, you have someone who's grateful because they learned something, and they now have the skill set you need. And they're good people. They work their hours, and then they're reliable, and they'll go through a lot for you. So I think that's the other option. Skill them up. Hire the right person, skill them up. You don't always need people with the right skill set. You need the people with the right personality type to match what you need. So that's another way to go. And I think that's in general for a lot of people. I think invest in your people. There's a lot of relatively cheap training out there that's also good. So invest your time in that. A lot of people are like, oh, I probably only have work for 30 hours a week for my VA. Well, that's 10 hours a week where they can improve on their skill set that help you in the business. So I think, think about that. Think about finding the right people rather than necessarily the right skill sets.
Yeah, totally. And so what I would say, here's the main challenge. When people develop, for example, a great link builder, they rarely let them go. All right. So you typically won't see a ton of amazing link builders on the open market, because people often, the way people usually become very good link builders is they work for someone who have a solid process doing it, and they learn that, and they become very good at it, right? Obviously it does happen that people like that close down, but in most cases that is not very common. So really, for me, particularly with link building, it's very much around building a solid process around it, really building a solid training system around it. And I know that doesn't necessarily sound super sexy for people, but it's really the best way of getting around it, right? Because link building is one of those things that it's not in principle super complex, but you often need to have get at least some good knowledge around it to be very effective at it. But like with most things, if you have a solid business process, it becomes significantly easier teaching more people, more staff, how to do it, right? So it's really a question from my point of view of having a solid process, having solid training, so that you can teach anyone how to do it, right? And the good thing is what that forces you to do as well is really look at your process. It really forces you to sort of say, well, how do I break it down? Because one of the challenges for a lot of people, particularly in SEO, is it's all in their head, right? It's like all of them, it's like, oh yeah, I did this outreach and I did it this way and this way. But if you actually have to start documenting things step by step, if you actually have to train someone on how to do it, it often actually helps you improve that process, because you start breaking it down at a whole other level than you've been used to. And that's very often a really good way of actually improving the overall process as well, right? But that's really what I would recommend, because it is, it's not necessarily very easy to find people who are good at link building. And honestly, I mean, we've been through it. So I've definitely been looking for people who have a lot of good link building expertise, and occasionally you can find some, but really my experience has been that building it yourself is just so much easier, right? Shaping those people yourself and really building up the expertise, it just overrules everything, right? And again, like if you need a developer, yes, you definitely don't want to teach someone how to be a developer. That's a multiple year process and so on. But for many things, I mean, the personality and the mindset is just overrules everything else by so much, right? Like finding a good human being is just so much more important, and therefore it's worth investing in in their development, right? So, anyone else on the live chat have other questions around outsourcing and management, niching down, etc.? Just checking here if we have anything.
Or board games. I know a lot about board games. If anyone has any questions about
Board games.
I even have some in the background here.
Fantastic. So this one is also a little bit relevant. So working in a larger agency, we're constantly using outsourcers, but we're many people trying to use the same staff to get stuff done, and it's not very effective. What's the best way from an agency perspective to make sure you utilize your outsourcing staff correctly?
Clear processes, but also have a very clear segregation of responsibility. So if you have multiple VAs doing more or less the same, make sure they know exactly what their responsibility is. So, if you have multiple link builders, then have one that works on links with DR 20 to 40 and one that works with DR 40 to 50. So they're very, very separate, or one works for one niche and one works for another. But make sure that the segregation of duty is very, very clear. And I think that would be the key for me. If you so you make sure there's no doubling down on work. Another thing is, depending on how many you have, find the one with the best leadership ability and ask them to oversee the department. That's not necessarily the person who's best at the task, but the person who's best at organizing the workload. If you have like 5 or 6 people that do more or less the same thing, it can be a full-time job for you to make sure that they don't do the same thing. So find someone that, again, we talked about, getting the most value out of your buck, and promote one of your staff who's maybe good at that to manage the workload and manage the tasks. But yeah, it is, you don't want to, Matt and I have several times ended up doing the same task because we missed it. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I would say as well, I mean, particularly if you're in an agency and you're multiple people trying to use the same staff, build a system if you don't have one for prioritization, right? Because in any business there is various business priorities, and wherever that's a first come first serve system, or and really most project management tools can do that pretty effectively, or it's based on client priority, right? Like you might have clients that take precedence over everything else, as an example, and that could definitely be a good way to make that clear, right? Like, and again, it could probably be done in a project management tool, but just make clear to the staff so that they know when this stuff comes in, what am I supposed to do first? What am I supposed to do second? Because here's what tend to happen, is that when people have a lot of stuff to do and they have limited time, what tend to happen is, based on relationships, staff members tend to do the things for the people they like the best, or have the best relationship with first. That's not good or bad. That's not a bad thing towards the staff necessarily, but that's just the way it is, right? And again, if you want to go ahead, if you want to get ahead of, like, if you're really competing with internal time from other staff members, really the best way to get stuff done before other people is by building better relationships with the people doing it, right? Now, again, that's not necessarily the right thing for the business you're in to do that. So again, I really recommend that you either sit down and work something out from a priority standpoint. Also for you, like if you're working on a client and this is not our priority client, that's okay, right? As long as you know and understand, when is this likely to actually make to happen, right?
There's also an element, if you have multiple people touching the same tasks, make sure that the best one, or the one with the highest quality, touches the work that gives you the highest ROI. Yeah.
Right. Can hiring a VA for link building be a good return of investment for a small business in a niche market?
I mean,
so it depends. You want to go back and do and analyze the situation first, right? So you really want to understand, like, first of all, link building is the second aspect. You want to have your content first. If you have a whole bunch of good content and you feel it's not getting enough traffic, etc., then links is potentially a good move, right? But fundamentally, you want to be in a position where you have a clear expectation about ROI. So I wouldn't just recommend any small business to go and hire a link builder per se. Probably more an SEO person or SEO company or the likes. But if that's what you need, if links is what's required for you to get to the next level, and you have the other pieces in order, then it definitely could be, right? But again, I always recommend consulting with a SEO if you're not one yourself. So yeah.
Yeah, I think again we come back to one thing is it what you need, but also is it what you're good at yourself? Because then maybe you shouldn't be. If you are very good at and very efficient at link building, then you maybe don't need to outsource that. Maybe there's different part of the business that you're not very good at that you need to outsource. Maybe you're really bad at bookkeeping. Well, you need a bookkeeper then. Just you don't want to. So the thing that happens naturally for all of us is that the things we're not very good at and the things we're not passionate about are the things we don't do. And one of the key things about SEO and business in general is do all the things. And if there's things you don't like doing, they're not getting done. So that's the things you want to outsource first. Is the things you're not getting done for whatever reason, either because you don't like it or because you're not good at it. That might not necessarily be, what you think the business need outsourced the most, but it probably is. So you need to look at yourself very honestly and say, like, I'm really not getting, it could be LinkedIn. I'm not getting any link building done. I'm not doing any outreach. I'm really bad at it. I'm not writing my email copies. Like I have this massive list, but I'm not using it because I'm not writing emails. Well, that's the things you need to outsource then, or hire someone to do, because you need to do all the things. That's SEO 2020.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think we will finish up here. We'll be back again tomorrow at the same time at 5:15 EST.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.